We're now moving into the final lap of our kindness event. We're going to have 2 more talks before we close. And so it's right now my great pleasure to introduce Olga Klimecki, who is coming to us from Hamburg, a neuroscientist and psychologist. And she's going to talk to us about cultivating kindness through meditation, a psychosocial perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my very great pleasure to be here, and I'll be in some of your traditions because we are also studying Buddhist practices. And before I start with any of the content, this is always teamwork, so none of it is done by myself. And just as an example, I have 2 rather ancient by now pictures from the group I'm working with, or I have been working with, and of the funders who made our work possible in the first place. Okay, so I have divided today's talk into several parts. I will start with definitions of empathy, compassion, empathic distress, and with some experiences around it. Then I will tell you on our findings about how compassion-based practices can change brain functions, increase resilience, and promote helping behavior. And then I will talk about our studies where we tested the impact of mindfulness and compassion interventions on healthy aging. Then I will talk about our studies on conflict resolution, ranging from interpersonal to couple conflict to international conflict. And finally, I will speak about our latest work, which is in the field of education, and how socio-emotional learning can promote intergroup cohesion. So let's start with some basic definitions and experiences. I'd like to start with an experiment because I love doing experiments. And I will very artificially divide the room in 2. So this is one half, this is the other half. Okay, and I will ask, which one? I will ask this half here to either close your eyes or look away, don't look at the screen. And the other half, I will ask you to continue looking at the screen. And it will not take long. And I have an instruction for the part who continues looking at the screen. Please follow the instruction. Yes. And now everyone can look at each other again. So both sides of the room can look at each other again. Okay, I see some reactions, and I hear some reactions on that side of the room. I heard some laughter. Did you notice something?
I had no idea what was going on.
Okay, you had no idea what was going on. That's great. Other reactions?
I saw a couple. I only could see a couple of people from my view, but I saw a couple of big smiles.
You saw a couple of big smiles, yeah. And you know what I saw? I also saw a couple of big smiles on your side once you saw the others, right? Yeah, yeah. And this exercise, it always works. I can tell you I've been doing that for some years now. And it is to illustrate how contagious emotions are. Because emotions are super contagious. When we walk down the street and someone passes us by with a great smile on their face, this smile is contagious. And this is a precursor, emotional contagion is a precursor of then feeling empathy, of feeling the same emotion as another person is feeling, but being aware that this other emotion is triggered by the other person. Sometimes in emotional contagion we can just pick up an emotion, share it, but not being aware that another person caused it. Okay, we did all that. Okay. I'll speak about some of the definitions before we go into the matter. So empathy is defined as sharing another person's emotion. So when I meet a friend in a cafe and she walks in super happy, then I can share her happiness, I can rejoice in her happiness, knowing that the feeling I have now is due to her feeling, right? And when she walks into the cafe and she's super sad, I can also share that sadness. And because of the capacity to empathize with another person, we can adapt our actions and our reactions to that person. So if, for instance, I'm waiting for my friend and I think, oh yeah, I really have to tell her this super funny joke, and then she arrives and tells me, my father just passed away, I will not crack that joke on her, right? So empathy allows us to adapt our behavioral responses to other people because we share this kind of emotion. And by the way, we empathize by simulating other people's emotions. So we reactivate some similar brain areas as we activate when we ourselves feel an emotion. When it comes to difficult emotions, to suffering, we can differentiate two responses related to empathy. On the one hand, we can see empathic distress, which is defined as a feeling of being overwhelmed by another person's suffering. And this often leads us to withdraw, but sometimes it leads us to help. And then we have compassion, which is a feeling of care and benevolence for a person who's in pain, and this motivation to really help that person. And of course, we have the cognitive root. We can cognitively understand other people's thoughts, intentions. We can also cognitively understand other people's feelings, which is sometimes called cognitive empathy. So why do these differentiations matter? I have lived in Leipzig for some years, and whenever I went to work, I went on my bike and I passed the city center. And every day on my way to work, I would pass homeless people. And seeing these homeless people evoked very different kinds of reactions in me. So on some days, I would see them and I would feel overwhelmed, and I would just continue on my bike. And on other days, I would see them and I would feel touched by them, and I would stop and I would go and speak to them and ask how the night was and get them a cafe or a croissant from the bakery. And it was a very different kind of reaction. And because I lived there for several years, I could really see, like, on some days I'm like this, on other days I'm like that. And I think it's related to my kind of empathic response to their suffering. So when I'm in empathic distress, when their suffering is overwhelming to me, I tended to withdraw. And when I felt the care and compassion, I tended to approach them. And so what we studied in our work is whether there is a plasticity, whether there are changes in brain functions as a function of what kind of practice you do on the emotional level. So we knew before that your brain can change when you learn to play an instrument or when you study for an exam, but we wanted to see, does the emotional brain, the socio-emotional brain change as well? And you might know that in Buddhist cultures, there are different kinds of meditation practices, and then there's mindfulness practice, which has been derived from Buddhist cultures, but has been secularized, partly by John Kabat-Zinn and others. And mindfulness denotes being aware of the present moment, including sensations, thoughts, emotions, actions, motivations, and so on. And then there are more the practices that center around cultivating the heart, and compassion is one of these practices. You've heard about it already. And in our case, compassion, broadly speaking, is about cultivating benevolence and care towards oneself and others, but there are different facets of it, and I will not go into too much detail on that one. I'd like, however, to give you a little taste, even though you've had some tastes of these practices already, partly with Carola, partly with Christian just now, but I'd still like to give you a taste of what our more recent practices look like. Initially we had worked a lot with the sentences like may you be well, may you be safe, etc. A bit like Carola has done it with us yesterday. And more recently we work more with a range of visualization, so with images, with visualizations, but also paying attention to feelings. And we simplified it. So initially we worked with a range of people. So we worked with a benefactor, oneself, a friend, a neutral person, a difficult person, and then all human beings, or all beings, actually all beings, human and non-human. And more recently we simplified it. We just work now with a benefactor, or a loved person, a close person or animal, with ourselves, and then with all beings. And that seems to be enough because it seems to spread to other domains. So this is what we're going to do. I'll just sit down for this. So similarly to the other instructions, if at any point you feel this is uncomfortable, you can stop it, or if this practice is not for you, you can just watch others doing it and you don't have to be part of it. But if you want to be part of it, I invite you to take a posture that is comfortable and alert. And you can open your eyes or close them. And I invite you to focus on your feet and feel how your feet are grounded. How they are being carried. Feeling into the contact of your soles with their support. And exploring this contact, this grounding. And from here, I invite you to think of a person or of an animal that you like. That's close to you. And you can imagine that being as if they were in front of you right now. Seeing their faces express love and care towards you. And maybe there's a gesture, like a hug, or a hand on the shoulder. And maybe there is a phrase or a word that they are saying to you. And you can take in their benevolent and caring energy. Allowing every cell in your body to be nourished by it. Allowing this energy to spread throughout your entire body. And then you can thank that person or animal and move on to yourself. Wishing yourself well, to be safe and healthy. And reconnecting with that feeling of care and benevolence and kindness towards yourself. And you can explore whether there is a word or sentence that comes up. And this might be, may I be safe. Or I care. Or I trust. Or any other word or sentence that feels right for you in this moment. And maybe you want to add a gesture, like putting a hand on your heart, or just feeling the contact of your hands with your legs, or any other gesture that feels right for you in this moment. And you can explore the effect that this gesture has on you. Allowing the care and kindness to spread from the point of contact throughout your entire body. And with curiosity and kindness, you can explore what this feels like. And then you can spread that energy of benevolence and kindness to others in this room, in this city, to beings small and large, beyond this city, to the entire world. And spreading it also beyond our planet to other sentient beings. And exploring what it feels like to share this benevolence and kindness. And you can now let go of all the doing and just rest in awareness for a few moments. Maybe there is something you'd like to remember from this practice, or some challenges you noticed. And then you can visualize this room and the people in the room, the physical space we're in, before reorienting your attention to this room, opening your eyes, if you had them closed, introducing some movements, some stretches. Thank you for this shared practice. So this was to give you an idea of the kind of practice we do, and we sometimes do this rather briefly. So our short interventions last for about a week, and the longest one we did was 18 months. And I'll start with all the work that we did on changes in brain functions, in feelings, and in helping behavior. And this was a set of studies. This is just a part of those, but just to illustrate. So we either did 1 week of compassion training, or we did a week of empathy training, followed by a week of compassion training, or 2 weeks of memory training. And we measured participants in the brain scanner, in an fMRI scanner, where we recorded their brain activations before the training and after the training, and sometimes even after the second training. And you have a sense of what the compassion training was like. The empathy training was really feeling into the suffering of others the whole day. So the trainings were 1 full day and followed by evening sessions for about a week. And the memory training was a lot of fun too, so people learned memorizing items, and these items became more and more abstract with the method of Loki. It's a very ancient method used by the Greeks and the Romans to memorize their speeches. So this was also similar in structure, but it was very cognitive and not emotional at all. And so what did we do in the scanner? I went to the Swiss archives of the Swiss television to get some documentary video material, because it's very hard to evoke a social situation in the scanner when people have to lie still and they can't move their head more than 3 millimeters. So I took films that are usually sent to the television so that they can then show them on TV later on. And this is, for instance, a scene from a very young woman who has been wounded in an earthquake, so film material you would see on the news. And I also took some film material from documentaries. And I cut it into little snippets of 10 to 18 seconds. And then participants were asked to rate their empathy, their negative affect, and their positive affect after each of these films. Some of these films, half of these films, depicted other people's suffering. The other half of the films depicted other people in everyday situations. So just talking, walking, or selling things on the market. Okay, this is a bit complex. What did we see? The compassion-based intervention is red, the memory intervention is blue here, and you have high emotional films, so these are films depicting others' suffering, and low emotion films, these are everyday scenes. So what we see is no change in the memory training from before to after the training in positive affect. But the compassion training increased positive affect both for high emotion films and for low emotion films. I had expected changes here. I had expected compassion training to reduce negative affect, but it never did. I did several studies on compassion training, and in none of my studies did it reduce negative affect. Never. Since almost 20 years, I don't find it. And this was at first a surprise to me. And then I talked to long-term practitioners, and they told me, no, Olga, this is actually right, because when you have compassion for someone, you are not separate from that person. You still continue to resonate with that person. So in a way, it's a very different strategy of emotion regulation than to suppress your emotions or try to modify your emotions. You still share the negativity, but you add positive feelings of care and benevolence to it. This is seen here. We had some self-reports on what people experienced actually, and we saw really descriptions of care, benevolence. These were the words that were used. And then we always see this increase in empathy ratings for low emotion films, and I never understand it, but just to tell you, it still continues to puzzle me, but we still see it in studies. So there seems to be something about it that I can't understand yet. So if anyone understands this pattern here, I'm grateful for insights. So people feel more empathy towards everyday scenes than before, after compassion training. Here, this is yet more complex. So we see the effects of the different trainings where people first trained empathy for pain and then compassion, compared to a memory group that trained 2 weeks of memory. So first we see that empathy increases after the empathy training, here in blue, and it is maintained at that increased level after the compassion training, which makes sense because we trained that empathy in the first place. Then we see for the negative affect, I'll start with that, it doesn't change in the memory group, but it increases in the empathy training group from pre to post, and then it decreases to the baseline level after the compassion training. So it doesn't go lower than the baseline, but this excessive negative affect is kind of reversed or brought back to baseline, both for the high and low emotion films. And then here for positive affect, we see again a specific effect of the compassion training, increasing feelings of kindness and care, both towards people who are suffering, which you see here, and towards people in everyday situations, which you see here. Okay, I'll show you simplified images of the brain changes because they are a bit complex. So in short, empathy increases activations in a network that we know is, we know that from meta-analyses is underlying empathy for pain. So when we empathize with someone else's pain, there are now 3 meta-analyses having shown that we activate the anterior insula, which is an interoceptive cortex. So the anterior insula maps what we feel in a given moment, whether we feel warm or cold or pain or itchy or whatever, it's in the insula. And then it's also upregulating activities in anterior cingulate cortex, and this is a region that's co-activated with the anterior insula when we feel pain, but also when we empathize with pain. Anterior cingulate cortex does a lot of things. It's a hub in the brain. And then for compassion, the pattern in the brain was different. Compassion not only increased positive emotions, but it increased activations in 2 brain regions that are important for positive emotions and that are also seen when we look at studies on affiliation. So when women are shown pictures of their babies, or when partners see their romantic partner, these regions tend to be activated, so they are found in romantic love, in maternal love. We also find these regions, the striatum is important for reward, and the orbitofrontal cortex is very important for integrating emotions into decision making, but also for controlling all sorts of processes. So these 2 brain regions were increased after compassion training. So 2 different patterns of changes after these trainings. Everything okay? Yeah, okay. Good. There's also now meta-analytic evidence showing that meditation can increase resilience, and we see our little task with the videos as a kind of mini test of resilience. So how do people react to situations that are a tiny bit challenging? It's not the huge resilience of a strong life event, but still it's a kind of step in that direction, and we see that overall meditation can also increase resilience in some other studies. We also wanted to see whether this kind of compassion training will impact behavior. So to do that, we developed at the time in Zurich, it was a lot of fun, a little task where participants navigate a smiley through a maze, and if they reach the treasure in time, they get a financial reward. So we did that in Switzerland, so it would be about 50 cents per treasure in euros. And if they don't reach the treasure in their given time, they don't get the reward, and they can be blocked by gates. So every gate, the gates fall on different paths, and if the gate blocks a player, red keys open red gates and blue keys open blue gates. Simultaneously to our participants, there is one other player playing that game, and we do not instruct participants that we actually measure their helping behavior. We tell them you get rewards after, for each treasure that you get, but when we do test runs, they experience that another person helps them, so they know that they can also use their own keys to open doors for another person. But it's very costly in terms of time, because we were a bit mean and we timed it to each participant's capacities. So when in the test runs they were very quick, we only gave them a very short time. So going to get the key for the other player might mean that they don't get the treasure. I will not show you how the game works, but yeah, just so you can imagine it, right? So we measure how many times they open the other player's doors. Or maybe I can. Let's see. Does it work? No. Okay. Never mind. So what do we see? We see this is the percentage of helping behavior, and this is the compassion training group in gray before the training and in white after the training. And we see an increase in helping from before to after the training in the compassion group, but no significant change in the memory group. What we found very beautiful is at the time we gave participants paper and pencil, and they noted every day how many minutes they practiced and whether they were at the practice evening, which was an hour. And then we correlated the minutes of their practice with their altruistic helping behavior, and we saw that the amount of practice predicted the increase in helping behavior. Okay, interim summary for this part. We know that different emotions are associated with different kinds of plasticity in brain regions, so it really, for me, the takeaway message of these studies is that it really matters what we do in everyday life. So, do I spend time on my smartphone doing things, or do I spend time cultivating maybe feelings of love and compassion or care? It will really have an impact on the brain and on behavior and on well-being. And to me, summarizing this research and other research we have done and other groups have done, there seem to be two systems of experience, behavior, and neural function. So we know that experience is related to compassion, positive emotions, and social connectedness. So this is mainly work by Naomi Eisenberg, are related to helping behavior and to less aggressive behavior. And social connectedness in her work is also related to more activations in medial orbitofrontal cortex and in the striatum. And then we know that experiences like distress, negative emotions, and feelings of social disconnectedness are related to more activations in anterior cingulate cortex and anterior insula on the one hand, and to less activation, to less helping behavior and more aggressive behavior. So it seems that we really have a choice in which system we support in our life, and which we maybe weaken. Okay, now I'd like to talk about our work on aging, and this is huge group work. This was when we met in Berlin in 2019 actually, so a couple of years ago already. But Medit Aging is a huge team. I think at some point there were more than 100 people involved, so it's a really big project. And we study how we can promote healthy aging, and our speaker is Gaëlle Chatelain, and I'm one of the 6 co-PIs together with her. We do this work because the number of cases of dementia is expected to almost triple, rising from 57 million in 2019 to 153 million in 2050, so huge expected rise in dementia. But we know that simultaneously tackling modifiable risk factors in our lives, related to lifestyle, to emotional well-being, or to social isolation, can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 40%. So there are things we can do in our lives to prevent dementia, and I can tell you it's important to start early. Don't wait until you're 60 or 70 or 80 plus. Do it now, if you can. So, to test the impact of modifiable risk factors, we conducted 2 clinical studies, one across 4 countries, so England, Germany, Spain, and France. And this was with patients who report subjective cognitive decline, so we recruited them through memory clinics. But when we test them on tests of cognition, we do not see any impairment. And these participants, we did behavioral tests and we drew blood samples from them. Then they did an 8-week mindfulness and compassion intervention or a health self-management program for 8 weeks. We repeated the battery of behavioral and blood tests, and then 6 months later, after baseline, we did another behavioral battery with them. The age-well study was really intense. So here we had 137 older adults, only in France. They did behavioral tests, blood samples, PET scans, EEG, 2 nights of sleep lab, fMRI, so they were tested for 2 nights and 2 entire days. Before the start of the intervention, then they were randomized to either meditation or active control. Active control was they learned a non-native language, which was English in their case, or to the passive control group. And then they had 18 months of intervention, so 18 months of weekly meetings with their group, of home practices, of daily tests on their tablet. So it was a very intense period for them. After 9 months, we did another behavioral test battery, and after 18 months, we repeated the full test battery, and then we did a 5-year follow-up. So it was a huge thing. Yeah. And then we did another study with expert meditators with the same test battery, and I will not talk about the expert meditator study today. So, SCD well. This was the study in 4 European countries with participants who self-report cognitive decline. The mean age was 72, and they either did 8 weeks of mindfulness and compassion training, and we modified a protocol from a colleague from me in Switzerland, Brigitte Kellner-Keller, who did a specific protocol for older adults, or they did an 8-week health self-management intervention that's based on a published manual. Just to tell you a bit more about how the interventions looked like, so in the caring mindfulness-based approach for seniors, we abbreviated it with the CMBAS, which is not very easy to pronounce, but anyways, Violet. They did a body scan, they did mindful movement, they did sitting meditations, and they had some psychoeducation to help them manage cognitive concerns and worries. It really included compassion, so it's not just an MBSR class. Or they did a health self-management program. This was also based on a published manual, previously adapted and validated for SCD. And here they learned on sleep, on stress management, on exercise, diet, and planning for the future. And after seeing Christian's films, I thought it's a pity because we also have film material on them, but I didn't include it. But you can look it up. We have a YouTube channel, and we have footage that our students at the time, they went to their homes and they interviewed them for effects of the intervention. So both from SCD well and from Age well, we have a lot of testimonies, and they are very, very touching and very diverse, I have to say. So if you feel like watching some of them, go ahead, we have it on YouTube. If you don't find it, you can email me and I can send you the link to the very rich video material that we have. What do we see in SCD well? In SCD well, our primary clinical outcome measure was anxiety. And why anxiety? Because it's a risk factor for dementia, and we saw a decrease in anxiety after both interventions. So both the compassion and mindfulness training, but also the health self-management program reduced anxiety from before the training to after the training, and this reduction was maintained at 6-month follow-up. And this was an important reduction because before the levels were above the clinical threshold, and after the interventions, the levels were below the clinical threshold. So we were quite proud of that, even though we had to write a null result paper because we had hypothesized that the mindfulness and compassion intervention would be better than the health self-management program. But I think overall it's good news. When you want to improve your health, as you age, you can do various interventions. It doesn't matter whether you do something to promote your health or a meditation intervention. We also saw that both interventions increased cognition or improved cognition on a composite score of cognition that encompasses several different measures. We also see some specific effects. So we see that the compassion and mindfulness training increased self-compassion. And the interesting thing here is it didn't do it from pre to post training, but we only saw that increase at follow-up. For physical activity, the picture was much clearer. So we saw an increase in physical activity in the health self-management group. It's not surprising, but just to tell you that we see that increase from pre to post training, and it's maintained. So just doing an 8-week program that tells you how physical exercise is beneficial for you and how you can implement it in your life can have lasting changes on physical activity, which is great to prevent dementia. Now let's come to the age well primary outcome. So we had hypothesized, based on a previous study with expert meditators, that in these 137 participants from France, randomized to either meditation, non-native language, or no intervention, we would see a change in the anterior cingulate cortex, this hub in the brain, and in the insula, this important region in the somatosensory, or this somatosensory cortex that we have, and we did not see these effects. So neither the volume nor the perfusion, so how much blood goes through that region, changed in our meditation group compared to the other groups. Here to the English exercise, and here compared to no intervention. So this was a bit of a bummer, but what we saw is, and here are pictures of our real participants, so this is the mindfulness group, and this is the English group. What we saw is that the mindfulness group, compared to the English group, had an improved attention composite score and had maintained their socio-affective capacities encompassing compassion, empathy, and prosociality. So this is a composite score, including those measures. We also saw that both of these interventions, the meditation training and the non-native language training, reduced loneliness. So we have loneliness here. This is before the training. This is at 9 months into the training. And we see a reduction here already in the English group, not yet in the meditation group. And I should add that in the first 9 months we did mindfulness, and in the second 9 months we did compassion with them. So you see the kindness really helped to reduce loneliness. But the English group did so as well. So the loneliness was reduced in both groups after the 18 months training. I have some voices from participants which I quickly added while during the Q&A with Christian, because I thought it might be very nice to see. We did a lot of interviews with them, and we just submitted a paper, I think last week, on these qualitative data, on these experiences. So I will read these voices to you. This is from Age Well after 18 months of intervention. Globally, meditation helped me to appreciate myself in a more balanced and positive way. I learned to accept myself as I am, with a more serene attitude, more objective as well. I'm more aware of my weaknesses without forgetting my qualities. I had often a deformed view of myself, judging myself, forgetting that I was struggling to do my best. I always had the feeling that I was failing at something, being wrong about something. Now I tell myself, you did your best, an acceptance and a humility about this. And this is another one. I think I have acquired a little more kindness towards myself. It's a little gratifying indeed. I think we need to learn to love ourselves a little bit. We're not that bad after all. And this one. I think I'm one of the people who didn't like myself much. Sometimes we really don't see ourselves as we are. Now I like myself. I like myself and I know my faults. I'm aware of them. And then I tell myself that we all have faults. We can realize that when we can talk, and that ultimately we might as well love ourselves. And this one here. I changed my inner functioning. Well, I hadn't thought of that from that angle, but I think I value myself internally, personally. I don't tell myself you're capable of doing that, that's not the point. But you can be different internally. You know, it's really interesting. So this is just a small excerpt of all the voices we have, and we have summarized some of them in this paper in different groups, and this is from the kind of compassion group that I took these voices. There's also a film on the participants of our study. This was a movie done by François Cola, and it's called Gold Seniors. It was very touching for me to watch because it's about their experiences. So he follows 4 participants throughout these 18 months, and they report their experiences throughout this time. And the touching thing is they report about friendship. He films them while they meet in cafes out of the study, and it's very touching to see them going through struggles and then being there for each other. So there's a lot of lived love and care, I feel, portrayed in that film. And because it was done in Normandy, this is a very small picture, but they have that hobby of walking through water even when it's cold, you know, in wetsuits, and they do that a lot there. So this is our participants actually walking through the cold waves. Yeah. So as an interim summary, we have seen in HWell that both interventions, the compassion and mindfulness-based intervention and the intervention that is centered around health self-management, decrease anxiety, which is a risk factor for dementia, and increase cognitive functions. In HWell, we did not see a significant effect on brain function or perfusion, on brain volume or perfusion after 18 months of intervention in the regions where we hoped to see it. But we saw that compared to the non-native language training, the mindfulness and compassion intervention improved self-reported attention and socio-affective capacities. We also saw that both the mindfulness and compassion-based intervention and the English intervention reduced loneliness. But this is really a caveat, and I've been looking at these data for almost 20 years now in these intervention studies. There is always huge inter-subject variability in the data. So whenever, and I do this after each of these studies, whenever we plot each individual, and it's a lot when you plot 137 individuals, but whenever we look at each individual trajectory, we see that some people improve, other people maintain their functions, and other people get worse. And this is in every single study, on every single measure, we see that. So, meditation, like any other intervention I have ever tested, does not have uniform effects on everyone. What we report are average values. So across people, sometimes these interventions have beneficial effects. But for every single individual, it's very different. So we always had people in our interventions who said, it's not for me, I don't like it, and it's very important to respect that because the people know when something is not good for them. And I was very fortunate when I did my training to become a mindfulness teacher. I had a training in doing a trauma-sensitive approach, and I think we did not incorporate that well enough in some of our past studies, that we were not sufficiently paying attention. The trainers who conducted these trainings were not paying sufficient attention to the potential trauma that meditation can re-evoke, and people can relive their traumas sometimes in silence. By now we published a lot of studies. I just showed you some. More of our work can be found when you search for aging on PubMed or other search engines. And just to tell you about it, I have no slides on this for now, but we just finished last year, we finished an intervention study where we worked with dance and movement and music with older people, because we thought it's so much more fun to have a more integrative approach. And and we had people just interact and dance to music together, not very wildly, but it did something to me as well, and I've incorporated these mindful dance movements more and more in my trainings as well. And I find that in the groups that I teach, I see a lot of beneficial effects on people when they do that in movement. And because I never teach the groups that we study, I don't know what it does to the participants apart from what the trainers tell me, but I can say from my experience, it really changed something in my view of mindfulness and embodied compassion as well. And I'm currently experimenting a lot with this dance and music aspect. Okay, now we switch again to a completely different topic. So I was working in Geneva for 8 years and working next to all these big organizations. I conducted several studies on aggression and on conflict, on interpersonal conflict, couple conflict, international conflict. And I learned a lot from mediators in the field. And one quote I like is from Ronald Reagan, who said, "Peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means." And so what we wanted to see in a range of studies that I will present to you in a bit is how the practice of compassion that's just done for yourself, a loved one, and for all beings can maybe transform conflicts. And it's very important, before I will show you these studies, it's very important to do it the indirect way. I did studies the direct way, where I tried to manipulate people in conflicts. It didn't go well and it backfired. It made the conflict worse. I can only tell you, don't do it. And then when I looked at the literature, when I had this strange effect that the conflict got worse after I told them to empathize and take each other's perspective, I looked into the literature and my colleagues in Israel found the same thing. So don't go there. Don't do these direct interventions. Do indirect interventions. What can they look like? There's a host of indirect interventions you can do, and Eran Halperin is an excellent source for these. So he's a researcher in Israel. We've also worked with him, who has written an amazing book on emotions and conflict. So we know that there are some constructive emotions when it comes to conflict resolution, and these are hope. Guilt is an important one. So if I feel guilt for my past actions, I'm ready to repair a relationship. Compassion is the one we studied. And then we know that there are some destructive emotions, like hatred is one of the most vicious ones. Fear can also be destructive in many cases, and Schadenfreude, malicious joy. And then there are some who are in between. Anger can be constructive or destructive. Eran and colleagues have shown it. We have seen it in our own studies in Geneva. Empathy can also go both ways. But I'll focus on compassion here. So how do emotion-based interventions affect interpersonal conflict? This was a master thesis by Patricia Senna, PhD thesis, sorry, by Patricia Senna-Scurotto. She also did a master thesis, but I will not present it here. So she conducted a randomized study with 108 participants who had 5 weeks of either compassion training or emotion regulation training, or they learned Italian because it's a beautiful language we adore. So it's a non-native language training. And we asked them, we didn't specify the kind of conflict they had. We asked them to name a difficult person, just their first name. And so I can say Franz because I don't know any Franz, it's a safe name for me. So let's pretend I'm a participant and I say Franz. So we would ask our participants before and after the training to read little vignettes of what happens to Franz. So I would read a little vignette saying, oh, imagine Franz goes to an important job interview and he has a coffee in his hand, and just before the job interview he spills that coffee over his white shirt. And then we ask participants, how do you feel when reading that vignette? Do you feel compassion? Do you feel malicious joy? And how close do you feel to Franz? And we would show them circles from very far apart to much closer. And so who is that difficult person? It varied. So in a quarter of the cases, it was someone from work. In some other cases, it was a former friendship, a former relationship, a former family member, neighbors, or other. So very different relationships that we studied here, but we just asked them to name one first name. And what did these trainings do? We see that here is before and after the training. The compassion training is the kind of straight line, and then we have two dotted lines, one for reappraisal with the triangles and one for Italian with the kind of squares. So compassion ratings went up only for the compassion group. Okay, this is just a manipulation check, it worked. People felt more compassion for their difficult person, Franz in my case, after the training than before the training. Then Schadenfreude went down, malicious joy, for when he spilled his coffee over his shirt, from before to after the training in both emotional groups, so in the reappraisal group, emotion regulation, and in the compassion group, which is great because malicious joy can be associated to malicious actions sometimes. And then the closeness feeling went up only in the compassion group. So only people in the compassion group reported, oh, I actually feel closer to that difficult person. And it's important, we never trained the difficult person. We only did compassion for like with a benevolent person or with a benefactor, with themselves and for all beings. That was it. They did the transfer themselves, and that's really important. Then we studied couple conflict. We did many studies on couple conflict. I love doing couple conflict in the lab because it works so well. And this is like one of my favorite cartoons. The phone rings, the woman picks up, and she's like, can I call you back? We're having our favorite argument. And it's really amazing. We have done several studies on couple conflict with mediation, without mediation, whatever, where we invite couples in the lab and we film them, we audio record them, they are hooked up to our measures of skin conductance, of heart rate. Sometimes there's a third person in the room. And in the beginning we were like, oh my God, how are they ever going to have a conflict in that lab setting? And you put them there. And after a very short time, when we ask them to speak about their favorite topic of disagreement, it gets really heated. Like, I've never been present in this, but we had video recordings that we had shown also during conferences or public talks, and we stopped showing them because we felt it's too embarrassing actually for the couple to show how they behave towards each other. It was to that degree that we decided not showing it, even though they consented to them being shown. And we had one situation in which someone had to stop them because we thought they would hurt each other. So it gets really wild in the lab, and they talk about all sorts of topics. I had a PhD student who did studies on mediation, and at the time we did a debrief every evening, so every evening he would tell me about all the different topics and all the different couples. Yeah, but it was quite nice nonetheless. And so I didn't know which couple talked about what, but I had a sense, and they talked about sexual topics sometimes and very intimate things while we were filming them. So I was quite touched that they had this trust in us as well to be discussing these topics while in the laboratory. So it's a great paradigm if you ever want to study conflict. I can highly recommend. Okay, and actually what we saw, I didn't put the picture up, but what we saw is that it increased the satisfaction of, so we also did either compassion training or emotion regulation or Italian, and this time we randomized the couple, not the individuals, but the couple did the training together. And we saw more satisfaction with the conflict discussion in the couples who did the compassion training. And we also saw that the couples in the compassion training, they were more actively advocating for their own interest after the training, which was great. Because it's super important when you are in a conflict or when you have a conflict to find a solution that's lasting. So when one person just says yes, yes, yes to whatever the other person wants, this will bring a quick solution but not a lasting solution. So to have a lasting conflict resolution and solution, you need to also stand in for your own interests, which was increased after the compassion training. We were very happy about that. And then we saw that the reappraisal training reduced the cortisol response, so we had measured the saliva cortisol before and after the conflict discussion, and we actually measured it 8 times, but it reduced the salivary cortisol. Patricia also went to Israel to do a study there, and the idea was to compare compassion training to a memory training, and then just when we were ready to roll out the study, the pandemic hit, and so we couldn't do like in-person trainings and group trainings and everything. We had to switch to online. We shortened it to 3 weeks instead of 5 weeks, and we only did it with Israelis at the time. And this was partly inspired by works from our colleagues, which had already shown that a mindfulness-based intervention compared to no intervention can have a beneficial effect on attitudes of Israelis towards Palestinians. What did we see? If we had just the compassion group with a passive control group, it would be great, it would look wonderful. So this is the mean closeness feeling and the change. So from before the training to after the training, and here for once I show you all the single points of our data, right? And you can see for yourselves how they change and how different people are. But on average, in the compassion group, there is an increase, and this increase per se is significant, but not compared to the memory group, which also increases, even though it's non-significant. But then the difference between the groups, there is no interaction. So it's not better to do a compassion training than a memory training when it comes to increasing the feeling of closeness between Palestinians, between Israelis and Palestinians this way around. We also measured pro-social behavior as the readiness to support humanitarian actions for Palestinians. And this was during the pandemic, so this was many years ago and before the conflict that we all witnessed in the past few years. And we saw that the compassion training only tended to increase pro-social behaviors, but this was not significant, it was only a trend. So not so much hope, but maybe something to think about in the future. Interim summary for that. We see that compassion-based interventions can show transfer effects on different conflicts, including interpersonal conflict, couple conflict, and to a very small degree, maybe if we do it differently, to intergroup contexts. More recently, we have been working in the field of education, which I find more and more important, maybe also because of experiencing how important education is with my own child. And Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And we believe it also matters for lasting peace building and for maintaining democracies. We know that global peacefulness has been deteriorating over the past 20 years. Violent conflicts, displacement pose a serious burden to mental and physical health, especially in children. And there is a lack of rigorous research on how to promote conflict resolution and resilience both in children and adults, and especially in high conflict settings. Most of this research is done in the global north, so in Europe, in the US, but also of course in Australia, but not so much in countries of conflict. And there's a lack of studies on how to implement socio-emotional education interventions to promote peace-building actions. So, what did we do? We partnered at the time, or the other way around, the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs asked me to conduct studies on humanitarian education. So humanitarian values are the values that more than 190 countries agreed upon in the world, and these are humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. So what the Swiss did is for several years they had a 2-year training for teachers from all over the world to learn about humanitarian values and how to teach them in the school context. So the teachers, while they were teaching, they did an extra kind of training over 2 years, partly online, partly in person. And then they conducted a 1 week, kind of 5 days or 3 days intervention in their school with their children or with their communities. And so in our study, we had 96 participants, recruited by teachers and trainers in different countries. And the age range was from 13 to 27 years. and we tested participants before and after this training on humanitarian values. How did that training look like for the children or for the young people? On day 1, sometimes the 5 days were compressed into 3 days, but on the first day in general, they got to know the humanitarian principles. Then on the second day, they talked about their own values and about other people's values. Then they thought about humanitarian principles and practice. And then they came from personal to shared intentions. So they discussed how values are related to intentions in life, and they drew up an action plan on the 5th day. They also learned a lot about taking care not to harm themselves or to bring themselves into danger, because this was done in various countries. So our studies were just done in 4 countries. Back then we added South Sudan and Zambia more recently. So here the data I will show to you was collected in Russia, in Belarus, in Armenia, and in the Gambia. But the pattern, at least for South Sudan, looks, or Zambia looks similar. We don't know for South Sudan yet, but Zambia looks similar. So participants did the training, and before and after the training, we asked teachers in each of these countries to do a little test with participants. And it's also a test with vignettes. So they read little stories before and after the training. And the stories go like this. Next week, Beirut, and Beirut was a name from an immigrant, kind of an immigrant name in that community. Next week, Beirut will be visiting us here. Although it was forbidden, Beirut has climbed a tree with friends last week and has fallen down. Now Beirut has a fractured arm and is wearing a plaster. As a result, Beirut has difficulties when writing and needs help. So participants would get these stories, and then we would ask them how they feel. So how much do you experience each of these emotions when you read about Beirut? And we had many more of these emotions, but just to show you 3 examples of questions on compassion, empathic distress, and malicious joy. So compassion would be, I feel sympathetic. Distress would be, I feel worried. Malicious joy would be, I actually had to laugh a little bit. And then they would put a cross on a paper and pencil questionnaire how much they experienced each of these emotions. And then we asked them for their willingness to help. Imagine you have a free afternoon next week. Would you be willing to help Beirut? And if yes, for how long? And then they could put in the time in minutes. And this intergroup helping for minorities is an important proxy for pro-social behavior in children, for peace-building behavior in children. Okay, so what did we see? Per se, maybe to say that before, when we just compare the training group and the control group, who did not receive a training, had schooling as usual or life as usual for the older participants, we see no impact, no difference. But to the degree that a training increased the compassion towards that outgroup member, it also increased the willingness to help. And the same is true for empathic distress. To the degree that empathic distress increased through the training, it also increased the willingness to help an outgroup member. So it seems very important to really target the emotions of the children to then target their peace-building behavior. Currently, we continue our partnership with the Humanitarian Education Hub, and we have partnered also with the Program of International Study Assessment to validate some of their measures with biological measures. So they have measures on social and emotional capacities in children. We want to validate some of them with biological measures and with behavioral measures. And we're also starting to evaluate next year the Happy Schools program in schools, probably in 35 schools in Vietnam. This is a bit of advertisement. I will start a lab in Innsbruck in January, and I welcome applications for a PhD position. If you know anyone who might feel inspired to carry out intervention studies and research on educational studies in Vietnam with me, please pass this on. Okay, so thank you. This is for questions.
Okay, thank you. Quite a lot there. we're going to take, we're running a little bit behind time. We're going to take a few minutes for questions and discussion, but we shouldn't take too long, I'm afraid. Good. May I open the floor? Dominic.
Have the microphone. Two quick questions. Were the times between pre and post, the intervals, always the same for all these studies, or was it different for each one? Or
Very different.
okay.
So some studies had only 1 week between pre and post, others had 8 weeks, others had 3 weeks, others had 5 weeks, and the longest one was 18 months. And we also did some studies that are very short, which I didn't show here. One of our strongest studies was just 1 minute, and we had amazing effects. So we really do the whole range of timing. So, and we see very different effects.
Okay. And then real quickly, is there any conjectures about why direct compassion intervention does not help conflict resolution? Why it actually seems to exacerbate it?
Yeah. I think it's exacerbating it when it comes from the outside. So you have to have the will yourself to change a behavior in a conflict. And when people get that instruction from me, they feel manipulated. And then that causes a kind of reactance, we say in German. So a kind of paradox or a kind of reverse reaction. And this is not my work, this is work from the Israelis. They have shown that this is the kind of mechanism behind it. But it also works the other way around. You can do a paradoxical intervention and you can exacerbate claims of violence, and then people actually backtrack and they become more docile. So it works both ways.
Other questions? Yes, John.
Thank you. Fascinating talk. I appreciate it. I'd like to hear more about that finding that you said was open to people speculating about. It's something that sounds interesting to get into. Could you say anything more about that? And please, I wondered how much it has to do with when you have compassion, you expand yourself, your world kind of expands. You reach out to the person. You connect, and there's an open-heartedness there. And so by increasing your connection to others, you're increasing your empathy to someone in a normal situation, even. So I see someone walking down the street. Well, if I'm not feeling connected, I might be neutral. But if I'm feeling very connected that day, I might rate that I empathize with them.
Yeah, it's true. And maybe the person who's suffering, maybe they evoke some kind of empathy directly, because these values are always higher. So maybe it's an increased sense of connectedness and empathy. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yes, it reminded me of the broaden and build theory.
Barbara Fredrickson. Yeah.
Yes.
And there's a question just behind.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm wondering about random acts of compassion. Have those been studied, and are also in the context how they're evoked, how the compassion is shown? Does that have an effect on whether the people who witness it expand their own sense of compassion?
It's an excellent question, and I'm just going through the literature. I know, but I don't, at least currently, there's nothing popping up in my mind on that. So I have no papers I can cite you on random acts of compassion. Yeah, but it's an interesting question, and I will look into it. Thank you.
Curie, and then Kristen. And then we'll draw
Thank
a
you
line.
so much. That was really fascinating. I was thinking about the long-term dementia study, so 18 months, and then you were showing the video, the golden years or something, tracing people who formed friendships. And I was just wondering, does that get factored into the analysis? Because if all these lonely, elderly people get together regularly, for 18 months, and they must form pretty significant friendships. And I guess depending on whether it's like English language or compassion, or mindfulness, they would have a different kind of social experience. I was just wondering if that gets factored into the results of...
We cannot really factor it into the results, but this is why we have this active control group who does also an 18-month intervention where they meet and interact, because we know that just being in a group and just having a social connection is so important. This is why we always try to include an active control group in our studies from the very beginning, right? Even the memory training we did back then, and I will actually have a little Christmas party with our memory teacher tomorrow. That was so much fun for the participants. You know, they came out with much more positive affect, and of course their memory was improved. But it's a lot of fun to do that. So, and we know it, and it's hard to factor it out. So this is why we have the active control group. And if we can afford another passive control group, because then we can really compare the effects of the groups to the no groups. And I mean, I didn't present these results now, but we see that the passive control group, we actually gave them a shorter training after the end, or we gave them the option to do either a non-native language training or a mindfulness and compassion training after the 18 months. And we see some beneficial effects there for them for the follow-up. So it has strong effects to do things in groups, and I can highly encourage that kind of activity. Yeah.
Kristen?
Thank you for the great talk. I have a question about gender. I noticed that one of your slides was like pink and blue when you were talking about connectedness, social connectedness, and social disconnectedness. But I also noticed in the study about Behruz, the minority child, that the control of the study said that for the child, it had to be a child of the same gender. Mm-hmm. So are there effects differently looking at men and women?
Sometimes. So we know in general that self-reported empathy levels and also brain responses to empathy-evoking situations differ in men and women. And sometimes in some of our studies we have just looked at women or just at men because we didn't have enough funding to do the double sample size. And sometimes we compare men and women, like in HWell, we are sufficiently powered to compare men and women, and we see some very interesting effects. Now, currently, mainly we saw that with cortisol and cognition, where we had some puzzling effects, where with memory and cognition being better in women when they had higher cortisol, but being worse in men when they had higher cortisol. And so we see all sorts of patterns between men and women. I'm wondering, when it's just a self-report, to what degree it's really true. So I've done studies on aggression. In Geneva, I didn't report them here, but I've done them only in men. And I had men hitting the furniture in the lab. Like, we filmed them, like I would see that they were just hitting the furniture. And then when I asked on my little questionnaire, how much anger do you feel? And they're like, oh, 0. I was like, if that's a 0 for you, I don't want to see a 10. So, you know, we never know what participants actually put down as a response and to how this is influenced by socialization and all other factors. So, yeah.
Good. You guys have been doing a pretty good job of keeping your questions short. So I am going to take the last 2 questions, but I'm then going to draw a line under it. So Christian and then Alexis.
Maybe can I go first?
Oh, is that on the point? Okay, sure.
It's just a short request for you to just take the Ronald Reagan slide out. As someone who grew up in Ronald Reagan's America and was politically formed in AIDS activism and Central American solidarity activism, Ronald Reagan is just responsible directly for so many deaths that I really think it's not a good, it's not a thing to joke about, really. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That has to be short, okay. I'm completely fascinated with how people can measure stuff in the brain, and I know nothing about, and also how you can do these calculations, and it seems to come with also a lot of hope for you can do certain things. And I appreciate very much how you also attend to the possible adverse effects, and that has to be But anyway, my question is just how the heart, can't you start scanning the heart and or what is being done in that? I'm just so curious because all of the people we talk with are not pointing to a particular place in the brain. They talk about this area, right? And I would be so curious to hear what's going on in that area.
Yeah, we did in the first studies. We did measure heart rate activities in the scanner actually while they saw these films, and my very first master student looked at the heart rate activities, and she did everything. Like we did all sorts of analyses. There was nothing in the first study. But there are other studies reporting changes in heart rate variability, which is a measure of how quickly your body adapts to a situation. So when the variability is high, your heart beats fast when you need to beat fast, and it slows down very quickly. So that's a good measure. And some studies find that. We didn't find it then, and we couldn't implement that in the French study. It's in the couples, it was too noisy because they moved so much. In the conflicts, we had a lot of heart rate, but it's just too messy. So in my own experience, we could never find anything there when we tested it, partly because of bad data and partly because there was just nothing. Others reported. So there seems to be the possibility of changing heart rate variability. But yeah, I think it's relatively thin yet, the evidence we have. I think I would need to see much more to be sure that it's very reliable. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.